Global Witness got to this campaign because over our years of work in investigations, what we realised is that corruption isn't about something that's happening somewhere over there, it's happening right here. And that it's not about a few rotten apples, it's not about some dodgy politicians and businessmen in faraway countries. It's about a globalised financial electronic system, effectively. And that has become increasingly the case as the world of business has moved online, whether that's bank transfers or the ability to set up 500, a set of shell companies, hundreds of shell companies all over the planet to hide real identity. And so what we basically decided we needed to focus on was actually that underlying system, the underlying structures that make this kind of globalized corruption possible. And that's why we launched the anonymous company work and campaign. And again, working with lots of other organisations who all recognise that this is impacting in all sorts of different ways.
And you mentioned the Nigerian example. I've got one here, which is the secretive mining deal that Global Witness investigated in the DRC, and which deprived people of $1.36 billion, which is twice what the government spends on health and education. I mean, these are phenomenal figures. And I think you say in one of your reports, $450 billion illicitly left Africa during the past decade. Now, when you're talking about these sorts of figures, you wonder, why is it only now that we have a campaign like this? Why has it taken so long? Because it seems like a no-brainer.
Well, I think it's about raising consciousness. I mean, I find it very interesting, for example, when talking to people in business, there's a couple of responses, one of which, and I talk to a lot of people in business because I really want to understand how people think and what the challenges are that they face. And they face very real challenges operating in a lot of different countries. One is that, well, we've got corruption, it's always with us, what can we do about it? And my response to that is, well, does that mean you do nothing? And then the other one is that there is this sort of tendency to think that it's all about corrupt politicians and business people, as I said earlier, somewhere over there. But what isn't recognised in terms of this system of corruption and facilitation is that, in fact, America and Britain are two of the best countries for secrecy. The World Bank study, the Puppet Masters one, which you may well know from a couple of years ago, which looked at over 213 cases of grand corruption going back over 30 years. It found that over 70% had involved the use of anonymous companies, and the majority of those, for corrupt politicians, the country of choice was America. And in fact, America incorporates more companies than the 41 tax havens jurisdictions combined. So America is key on this, which is why we were so delighted to be awarded the TED Prize last year, which has really helped us move the work from beyond UK and Europe out to America.
So how is it going in America at the moment? Because there is a bipartisan group of US senators at the moment who are sponsoring a bill for beneficial ownership. How is that going? Is that likely to bear fruit?
It's a slow haul. I think there's that. The administration has said it's going to take action. Is it going to take the right action? It was a lead on this issue initially back when the G8 picked the issue up a couple of years ago. It's slightly fallen from that lead now, which is a shame. I think there are complexities about America. America is, all the states have different ways of operating. So I think it's a long haul issue. I think there is progress. I mean, we were delighted to see that in Delaware, described in the New York Times as a den of thieves because of the ease with which people can set up anonymous companies there. Not saying that they're all dodgy companies by any means, but it's a very easy place to set up a company. Even in Delaware, there started to be last year debates about the issue. And half of the state legislators wrote to the Delaware congressional delegation urging them to support the bipartisan bill. Now, I think a year ago that would have been unheard of and unthinkable. So I think change is possible, but I think on issues like this, change can take time. So, for example, the B Team, which is a group of very visionary business leaders, have got behind the issue and are working publicly towards
Richard Branson.
People like Richard Branson, Mo Ibrahim, Paul Polman of Unilever, Josh N. Seitz, formerly of Puma, whole range of people with, between them billions of dollars of corporate startups and very major companies. So they know what they're talking about. So I think there is movement, and I think the fact that it's, it is now law in Europe. UK has gone out ahead even further and is setting up a public registry, which is just really fantastic. It shows that it's completely doable.
And that's the ideal, isn't it, having a public registry?
That's the ideal, because that means that anybody can go and find out what's going on. So, for example, if you are a Ukrainian, a small Ukrainian civil society organisation with no money, it's going to be possible to find out whether the former Prime Minister, his presidential compound, it was discovered the ownership came through a range of anonymous companies, some of which in the UK. Now that would be possible to find out with the public registry. What Europe has done as a whole, which is it's a great first step, is it's setting up the registries, but there's going to be a legitimate interest test. And what we hope over time is that because a number of countries like the UK and Denmark, France and the Netherlands are all going out beyond that because they don't see a problem with the public registry at all. We think that the other countries involved will also move to that as they see that there isn't an issue. And I think once it's up and running, I think it will also show America and the various states that actually this is a very feasible thing to do.
Mm-hmm. It sounds like the UK has been leading by example in this case, but there is...
And it needed to, because it was a major secrecy jurisdiction.
Yes, but in some ways it still is, because if you look at the overseas territories, the Crown dependencies,
yes.
They're some of the most secretive jurisdictions in the world. The Tax Justice Network, I've got a comment that they made about it when it calls it the spider's web of interlinked financial services serving the political and economic agenda of the City of London. So how many strides have been made to try and break down that network?
Well, I think that is the next step. That's being certainly looked at. Lots of people are working around that. Tax Justice Network, I think, have played a crucial role, actually, in opening up through taxation and the issues of taxation, this whole issue. I think it's made it very easy for everybody to understand why this is important. Because sometimes people will think about that, you mentioned that deal in Congo, that $1.4 billion potential loss to the people of Congo, but it's all very remote. But when you start reading about it in your own newspaper, about your own home country, your own hometown, then I think it really brings it home. So I think that's been really powerful. I would go back to the point that, America incorporates more companies than all 41 tax havens jurisdictions combined. So that's not to say they're not important, they are incredibly important, and it does, there does need to be change on that. But America needs to take more of a leadership role in this issue. America really is key, and of course it's not just about the anonymous companies, it's also about the money and the movement of money and banks' failure to do so, and that's truly a global problem.
Well, I'm glad you brought up banks just then, because I want to come on to that now. And I've been reading your March 2014 report, Poverty, Corruption and Anonymous Companies, where you talk about how easy it is for banks and lawyers and company service providers to flout the Financial Action Task Force rules on ensuring that beneficial ownership is transparent and all the information is available. I want to talk a little bit about that report and how significant those findings were.
Well, I mean, what has struck us again through the years is that, by and large, the multi-hundred of $1 million or $1 billion deals, they're not done with suitcases of money. This is not about money under the mattress. So you do need big banking structures to move the money around. And despite the work of the Financial Action Task Force, it's absolutely clear that banks continue to completely flout both the, those nice, cosy, comfortable industry agreements about, voluntary guidelines about how they'll work, and actual hard law. One of the things that we've found is that this is part of this system of facilitators, this whole problem of this globalized international financial system, this pipeline, if you like, of corruption, this international pipeline of corruption. Well, one of the things we find that we've seen time and time again with banks is they're not doing what they should be doing, and enough around politically exposed persons, PEPs, and that remains unacceptable and shocking, and it needs tackling.
And this is about the knowing your client.
This is about the knowing your
customer.
client. So there's the work around the beneficial ownership about who really owns the companies, but then there's also the point about, if you have the son of a president of a very small oil-rich country moving vast amounts of money, who's on a reported income, declared income of, say, state income of $3,000 to $5,000 a month, and they're trying to buy jets and yachts. What is the bank thinking?
Should be raised.
Yes, and so on the other issue, there's a really fantastic report by a group of academics who did a mystery online shopping exercise. It's called Global Shell Games, and it did about 3,000 bits of research, and it showed that it looked at 60 countries, and apart from Kenya, America is the easiest, quickest country in which to set up a company and to do it all remotely. It also found, very worryingly, that American company service providers, so not banks here, but company service providers, were the quickest and the most likely to set up companies despite the correspondents flagging up potential risks of corruption and, even more worryingly, terrorism.